You know, for a whole millennium, there was this one single political entity sitting right at the heart of Europe. It was huge, it was complicated, and honestly, for most people, it's a complete mystery. So today, let's try and unravel this incredible historical puzzle, the Holy Roman Empire. Fast forward to the 18th century, and the philosopher Voltaire comes out with this absolute zinger of a quote. I mean, it's witty, it's brutal, and it just perfectly captures the confusion surrounding the empire as it neared its end. And this very quote, that's the central mystery we're going to solve right now.
So, the big question is, was Voltaire right? Was he just being clever for the sake of it, or did his famous quote actually hit on a fundamental truth about this thousand-year-old institution? To find out, we're going to break his claim down piece by piece.
All right, let's start with the last part of his statement because it's arguably the most important one. Was the Holy Roman Empire actually an empire in the way we usually think of one? So just take a look at this. When you put the Holy Roman Empire side by side with a typical empire like ancient Rome, the differences are just massive. Instead of one central ruler calling all the shots, the Holy Roman Emperor was elected. He presided over this decentralized patchwork of hundreds of different territories, duchies, kingdoms, free cities, you name it. He wasn't so much an absolute ruler as he was a roof holding the whole structure together.
And, this wasn't some new idea Voltaire just dreamed up. Even a century before him, back in the 1600s, legal scholars like Samuel von Pufendorf were scratching their heads. He famously called it a monster, not because it was evil, but because it didn't fit into any of the neat political boxes of the time. It wasn't quite a kingdom, not quite a federation. It was something else entirely.
Okay, so if it wasn't a typical empire, then why on earth did they call it Roman? That seems like a bit of a stretch, right? Well, the answer lies in this really powerful medieval idea. The key here is a concept called translatio imperii. This was a belief that the authority of the ancient Roman emperors never really died out. Instead, it was transferred, first to Charlemagne, the great Frankish king, way back in 800, and then it was really cemented with Otto I in 962. So by calling themselves Roman, these medieval emperors weren't saying they ruled from Rome. They were making a huge ideological claim, that they were the rightful successors to the Caesars and the supreme secular leaders of Western Christendom. And that, of course, brings us to the final piece of our puzzle, the holy in Holy Roman Empire. What exactly was so holy about it? Well, the core idea was something called Gottesgnadentum, which is just a fancy German word for divine right. The emperor wasn't just some political leader. He was seen as God's chosen deputy right here on earth. His whole job was to be the sacred protector of all Christians. This divine mission was the ultimate source of his power and his claim to be above all other kings. But, and this is a big but, that holy authority did not go unchallenged. The popes down in Rome also claimed to have supreme authority from God, and this sparked a massive, century-long power struggle called the investiture controversy. This really bitter fight over who got to appoint bishops did serious damage to the emperor's sacred reputation. And then came the final knockout punch to the empire's holiness, the Protestant Reformation. I mean, once the empire was split between Catholic and Protestant territories, the whole idea of one emperor protecting one single unified Christian faith, well, it became impossible. The very foundation of its sacred claim was just gone. So if the name was kind of a mess by this point, what was the Holy Roman Empire actually for? Like, what was its real job, especially in its later centuries? In practice, the empire evolved into something a little less glamorous, but maybe a lot more useful. It was a system for keeping the peace. Its real day-to-day purpose wasn't about conquest. It was about stability. You had institutions like the Reichstag, which acted as a court to settle disputes. It was designed to protect smaller states from being swallowed up by bigger ones, and it even gave regular people a way to legally challenge their own local rulers. And this quote just brilliantly captures that other side of the story. While one guy called it a monster, for a lot of the people who actually lived inside it, it was more like a sturdy, if maybe a little old-fashioned, building that offered real shelter and security. It was a system of law that for the most part actually worked. So, after 1,000 years, what finally brought this whole ancient structure tumbling down? Well, when the end came, it came surprisingly fast. It really happened in 4 quick steps. First, you had this massive internal rivalry between its 2 most powerful states, Austria and Prussia, which basically paralyzed it from the inside. Then, bam!
The French Revolution and Napoleon show up, bringing new ideas about nationalism and a whole lot of military pressure. In 1806, Napoleon convinces a bunch of German states to just leave the empire and form a new alliance with him. With the whole thing hollowed out, the last emperor, Francis II, really had no choice but to abdicate. And just like that, the Holy Roman Empire was gone.
Okay, so let's circle all the way back to where we started. After all this, was Voltaire right? And you know what? For the empire of his day, he was absolutely spot on. By the 1700s, that grand, ancient name just didn't describe the political reality on the ground anymore. Voltaire's genius was in seeing that huge gap between the label and the thing itself. So here it is, the final verdict. Not an empire. Correct. It was a decentralized federation. Nor Roman? Well, that's debatable. It was an ideological successor, not a direct one. And in no way holy? Yeah, pretty much correct. After the Reformation, it was hopelessly divided by religion. But, and this is the key takeaway, if we only focus on Voltaire's witty burn, we kind of miss the whole point. That confusing name hides the empire's true and incredibly important legacy. For hundreds of years, it was a surprisingly effective system for keeping the peace and upholding the law in a very, very complicated part of the world. And all this leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The empire was officially dissolved in 1806, sure, but you have to wonder, did its 1,000-year tradition of decentralized power and federal structures ever really go away? It's a legacy that you could argue is still shaping the political map of Central Europe to this very day.